The cold did not come all at once. It crept, the way shame does, the way grief does, working its fingers through every layer of her until there was nothing left that did not belong to it. Serafina Voss sank through the dark water of Ashvale Lake with her ankles bound in iron rope and her lungs burning with the last breath they would ever take, and she thought, so this is how I end. Not with claws and fangs, but with rope and silence. She had not screamed when they dragged her from her cot in the Omega quarters. She had learned early, too early, that screaming only invited more. She had not fought when Elder Drace bound her wrists behind her back with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, who perhaps enjoyed the doing of it. She had met his eyes, searching for some flicker of hesitation, some thin mercy. There had been none. Omegas who cannot serve have no place among the living. He had told her, his voice pleasant, conversational, as though they were discussing whether rather than her murder. You are nothing, girl. A gap in the pack. An absence wearing skin. Do us the kindness of being gone. Elder Drace, Ashvale Pack. She had been silent because she had no argument against it. Not then. Not standing in the blue dark of the pack's judgment with the whole of the Ashvale Pack arranged in a crescent behind their elders. Eyes averted, none of them meeting hers. Not even Mira, who had shared her table at meals for 6 years, and once held her hair while she wept over her mother's grave. They had thrown her from the bridge at the eastern edge of Pack territory. The arc of falling had lasted only a moment. The water had lasted much longer. Now, in the dark below the surface, the burning in her chest became a roar. Her wolf, small, gray, and lesser in every way the Pack had ever measured, pressed against the inside of her ribs, frantic and helpless. They were going to die together, she and her wolf. Too small, overlooked things vanishing into the cold and the black, and no one would come to look for them. Her vision narrowed. The last of the light from the surface, a pale ghost of moonlight, shrank to a point. And then she felt it. Presence. Enormous. Ancient. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the weight of all the open air beneath you. It pressed against her fading consciousness with a precision that was almost tender, almost careful, as though whatever it was not used to being gentle but was trying now, for reasons she could not fathom. Something entered the water above her. Something vast and powerful cleaving through the black surface. It reached her before she could understand what it was. And then there were hands, large, certain, alive, and the rope at her ankles snapped like thread. She broke the surface gasping. The moonlight hit her like a second birth. She coughed and choked and clawed at the air, half blind, half drowned, her body a ruin of cold and shock. Whoever held her kept her head above the water with an ease that told her they were not entirely human. They swam for the bank with slow, powerful strokes, dragging her along, and when they reached the shallows they lifted her as though she weighed nothing, as though she were something worth lifting, and laid her in the grass. She blinked up at the sky. Stars. The full moon, enormous and silver white, blazing above her. Then a face moved into her field of vision, and the world stopped being about cold or water or stars at all. He was looking at her the way she had always imagined storms must look at the sea, with the recognition of equals or perhaps something older than that. His eyes were pale gray-silver, almost colorless, lit from within by something that made her wolf go very, very still. Not from fear, from something she had no word for yet. He was soaking wet and breathing hard from the swim, and he looked at her like she was a problem he had not yet decided whether to solve or simply carry. "You're alive," he said. His voice was low, rough, stated rather than asked. She managed, through chattering teeth and a throat raw from swallowing half the lake. "Barely." Something moved across his expression. She would spend a very long time later trying to name it. "That's enough," he said. "Barely is enough." He picked her up again. She did not have the strength to protest, and something in her, exhausted, defeated, ancient with grief, was tired of pretending she didn't need to be held. She let him. She closed her eyes against his shoulder as he carried her away from the lake, away from the rope and the water and the elders who had fed her to it, and she let the warmth of him, impossible furnace hot, like he burned at a higher temperature than ordinary men, seep into the ice of her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know that the whole of the werewolf world would have fallen silent in shock at the sight of him carrying her. She didn't know about the title, the territory, the 10 packs that answered to his name. She only knew that his heartbeat was steady, and hers was not, and that something between them, something neither of them had asked for and neither could yet name, had just been irrevocably begun. Her wolf, for the first time in her miserable, half-starved life, settled into quiet. She thought, or perhaps her wolf thought it, or perhaps there was no longer any difference. He's ours. Serafina Voss closed her eyes and let the Alpha King carry her toward whatever came next. Chapter 1. The Wolf Who Does Not Bow. She woke to warmth and the scent of pine smoke and something else. Something dark and resinous, like cedar shavings and rain-wet stone, and for one disoriented moment she believed she was somewhere good. Then the ache set in, her wrists, her ankles, her lungs, the place between her shoulder blades where Drace had shoved her toward the bridge. The body remembered what the sleeping mind forgot. She was not somewhere good. She was somewhere unknown, which was either better or worse than good depending on who it belonged to. She opened her eyes. The room was large and stone-walled, the kind of room that had been built by people who intended to last. A fire burned in a hearth the size of a doorway. She was lying in a bed of such extravagant quality that it took her a moment to understand what she was lying on. She had spent the last 6 years on a cot with a wool blanket in a shared room of 8. This was something else entirely. Linen, she thought. And beneath that, warmth that was not purely the fire. She sat up too fast and immediately regretted it, the room tilting sideways. "Don't," said a voice from the far end of the room. He was standing at the window, her rescuer. In the daylight, gray and rain-thick, winter reluctant to release the sky. She could see him properly for the first time. Very tall, broad through the shoulder, with the particular stillness of a predator who has decided, for the moment, not to move. Dark hair, wet at the ends from the same rain pressing against the glass. That same impossible quality of mass, of presence, the way a mountain has presence even when you cannot quite see it. He was watching her with those silver-pale eyes, and his expression was exactly as unreadable as it had been the night before. "You need water and food before you try sitting up quickly," he said. "Your body lost a lot last night. Where am I?" Her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw by the lake water and whatever she had swallowed of it. He turned from the window to face her fully. The light caught the clean, angular lines of his face. Someone who had never been anything but dangerous, even as a boy, she thought, even at rest. Vethra Keep. My territory. The name landed on her like a dropped stone. Vethra. She knew Vethra. Every pack child knew Vethra the way they knew winter and hunger and the hierarchy. It was simply a fact of the world, the seat of the Alpha King, a name spoken in hushed tones or not at all, because to say it carelessly was to invite something enormous into the room with you. She stared at him. He waited with the patience of something that had never needed anything to hurry. "You're—" she started. Stopped. The thought assembled itself slowly, out of sequence, the way shock puts things together. "You're Caius Vethra." Yes, the Alpha King, the sovereign of all the packs, the apex of every hierarchy she had ever been ranked beneath. He had pulled her, an Omega, the lowest rung, the expendable, the cast-off, out of a lake and put her in a room that probably cost more per night than the whole of Ashvile's Omega quarters. She should bow. She should press her neck to one side and lower her eyes and say something deferential. That was the correct response. That was the only response an Omega was supposed to have in the presence of an Alpha, let alone the Alpha King. She met his gaze instead. It was reflex or exhaustion, or the part of her that the lake had stripped down to its core, the part that was too tired to perform submission it didn't feel. She looked at him directly and waited. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. She braced for anger. She knew anger. She had a comprehensive catalog of what it looked like in the faces of alphas who had decided she had overstepped. But it wasn't anger. It was something she couldn't place. Something that turned his face briefly, oddly younger, before the composure resumed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Serafina." Sarah. A pause. Then, because the part of her that was still half-drowned apparently had no sense of self-preservation. "You can call me whatever you like. I'm told Omegas don't have opinions about that." His mouth moved. She thought for a startled moment that he might actually be suppressing something that was not irritation. "I'll call you Serafina. You said that like a decision. I make a lot of decisions. I've heard," she said. "Whole continents arranged around them, I'm told." He looked at her for a long moment. She had the distinct impression she was being assessed in some way she didn't have the vocabulary for, not weighed and found wanting, which was the assessment she knew but measured differently against a scale she couldn't see. "Who put you in the lake?" The warmth of the room went nowhere, but she felt the cold of last night brush the back of her neck regardless. "My pack." "Why?" Not a question. A demand for accounting. "Because I couldn't do what they needed me to do." She paused. "Because I'm an Omega. And Omegas who can't serve are invaluable in other ways," he said, cutting across her with a quietness that carried more weight than volume. "Or have other purposes than the ones they've been assigned. Or simply have the right to exist without justification." She went very still. No one had ever said that to her. Not once in 23 years of being the lowest, the least, the one who existed to smooth the way for those above her. "You don't know me," she said carefully. "You don't know what I am or what I'm worth." "No," Caius Vethera agreed, picking up a tray from the table near the fire and crossing the room to set it on the bed beside her with a carefulness that seemed at odds with the rest of him. "Bread, broth, water, real food, more food at once than she was usually given in a day. But I know what they were doing to you, and I know I'm not going to let them finish it." He straightened, looked at her again with those impossible eyes. "Eat," he said. "Rest. You're safe here." He moved toward the door. She should let him go. She should say nothing, eat her food, be grateful and quiet, and take up as little space as possible in a room she had no right to be in. "Why?" she heard herself say. He paused with his hand on the door. Didn't turn. "Because," he said, after a silence long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. "I was near that lake for a reason, Serafina. I'm beginning to think it was you." He left before she could ask him what that meant. She sat in the warm room with bread in her hands and her wolf humming low in her chest, and she looked at the door he had closed behind him, and she thought, whatever this is, whatever comes next, I am not going to be easy about it. Chapter 2. Things that don't have names yet. She discovered several things in the first 3 days at Vethera Keep. The first was that the Alpha King did not, apparently, sleep like other people. She woke twice in the night to find the fire in her room rebuilt. She had not heard a door, had not sensed anyone. But the fire had been lower when she drifted off, and it was high again now, and she did not think the servants had been instructed to creep into her room in the small hours. She could not explain this, so she filed it away. The second was that the keep's inhabitants did not know what to make of her. She felt their confusion in every corridor. The betas who carried trays and swept stones. The guards who watched her move through the halls with a wariness they couldn't quite conceal. The 2 senior wolves who functioned as Caius's lieutenants and who looked at her with the particular bewilderment of people encountering a category error. She was Omega. She was living in the guest suite on the 4th floor. These 2 facts did not add up to anything they had a precedent for. The third thing she discovered was more difficult to file away neatly. Her wolf was changing. Not dramatically. Not in any way she could point to and say there is the moment it began. But the gray wolf who had spent her whole life small and quiet, who had learned to make herself compact and low and inoffensive, who had never once challenged the hierarchy because challenging the hierarchy meant pain, that wolf was beginning to stir in ways that made Serafina's hands tremble at odd moments. Reaching toward something. Straining at something. Reaching, she eventually admitted to herself on the morning of the 4th day, toward Caius Vethera. She found him that morning in the training yard, which she had not intended to enter. She had been exploring carefully, with the embedded caution of someone who had spent years learning which spaces belonged to her and which did not, and had pushed open a door that turned out to overlook the yard below. She should have backed away. Instead she stayed. He was sparring with the larger of his 2 lieutenants, a man the size of a wardrobe who went by the name Aldrich. They were both in human form but moving with the enhanced speed of partial shift, and watching them was like watching something barely contained by the laws of physics. Caius was not the largest wolf she had ever seen. Drace had had size on him and several of the Ashvale betas, But he moved as though size were irrelevant to the question of outcome, which, watching him, it clearly was. He disarmed Aldrich in 3 moves she couldn't entirely follow and then stepped back, breathing measured, and looked up. He looked directly at her window. From 30 feet below, in a yard he could not have been watching. He looked at the exact place she was standing and his eyes found hers with an ease that suggested he had known she was there the whole time. She did not look away. She seemed to be making a habit of that with him. He said something to Aldrich, who looked up at her with an expression of resumed bewilderment, then left the yard through a side door. She had moved away from the window by the time the knock came at the corridor door, but only just. He was still in his training clothes, dark, simple, doing nothing to obscure the way he was built. She was aware of this in a way she found deeply inconvenient. He had a glass of water in each hand and he offered her one without preamble. She took it. "You knew I was there." "Yes." "Since when?" "Since the door." She considered this. Is that a dominance thing? Alphas tracking movement in their territory. He was quiet for a moment. Partially. The word sat between them, weighted with its own omission. She thought about pressing on it, turning it over to see what was underneath, and decided she wasn't ready for what she might find. "How are you healing?" he asked instead. She flexed her wrists. The marks from the rope were almost gone. Omega healing was slow by pack standards, but functional. Quickly enough. "You're Wolf," he said, then stopped. Started again. "When I found you in the water. Your Wolf's energy, it was unusual." She felt the familiar tightening across her chest, the particular defensiveness of someone who has been told their whole life that their Wolf was lesser, inadequate, wrong in some fundamental way that could not be corrected. "Unusual how?" "Not lesser," he said, and his voice had shifted. Quieter, more careful, as though he understood exactly what she was bracing for. "Not what they told you, whatever they told you. Something else." She looked at him. "What kind of something else?" He held her gaze. "I'd like to find out. If you'd let me." It was the "if you'd let me" that did something unexpected to her. Not the promise of answers, not the suggestion that she might be more than what she had been told, but the asking. He was the Alpha King. He did not need to ask her anything. He could command. He could demand. He could take what he wanted the way every other Alpha in her life had taken, as though she were a resource to be drawn from rather than a person to be negotiated with. He had asked. "All right," she said, and felt her Wolf settle into something that was starting to feel dangerously like trust. She did not yet know the word for what was growing between them, but her Wolf did. Her Wolf had known from the moment they broke the surface of the lake and breathed the same cold air. Her Wolf had known since the beginning. Serafina Voss. That night she dreamed of a white wolf running through a forest that was not gray and cold but lit gold from inside, the trees burning with something that was not fire, and the white wolf was her. Was and was not, was more and different and vast, and behind her, keeping pace with the ease of something that would always find her no matter where she ran, came a shadow the size of a mountain. She woke with her heart beating hard and her Wolf pressed against her ribs like a secret trying to get out. The fire had been rebuilt again. She lay in the warmth of it and did not try to explain. Some things, she was beginning to understand, were not for explaining yet. Some things were for becoming.